The Centaur fleet hovered in the cold void of space, their ships cloaked by advanced stealth technology. They had studied countless civilizations across the stars, and in all their years of exploration, they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. The human warships, while technologically primitive compared to the Centaur's marvels, carried a strange, unsettling energy. Their designs, rudimentary, angular, and unrefined, were deceptive. There was something lurking beneath the surface of these vessels that even the brilliant minds of the Centaur could not decipher. Zorath, one of the leading tacticians of the Centaur, stood at the observation deck of their flagship, Lorithax, gazing out at Earth's distant moon. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, churned with the strange anomaly of the human ships. He had been part of the mission to scout and understand all forms of life, but nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for this. "They are not what they seem," Zorath muttered, his voice barely audible. His two closest officers, Krelth and Varric, exchanged glances. They too felt their unease simmering beneath their leader's words. "It's just their technology, isn't it, sir?" Krelth asked. He had spent countless years studying warfare in all its forms, and to him, the human ships appeared to be little more than old relics, powerful but crude. He had no reason to believe they could pose a threat. Zorath remained silent for a long moment, contemplating. His eyes shifted back to the human fleet on the radar, dozens of them, stretching out in their formation. Despite their apparent age, they were moving with precision, as though they knew something the Centaur didn't. "They've been active for less than 100 years, Zorath said finally. "That is hardly enough time to develop any meaningful countermeasures. Their technology, it's not just their ships, it's their behavior, their unpredictability. It's almost chaotic." He gripped the railing tighter, his expression tense. "It's that chaos we need to understand." The truth was, the Centaur had a single rule when encountering new species: never underestimate them. But with humanity, the rule was hard to apply. Despite their primitive technology, they had survived, and even thrived, against threats that should have destroyed them. They'd weathered wars, disasters, and unimaginable challenges. Every encounter, every battle, seemed to push them to the limit and beyond, revealing an uncanny ability to adapt and surprise. It wasn't the weapons they feared, it was the humans themselves. Zorath turned to Krelth. "Prepare the scout ships. But remember, do not initiate any scans. We need to learn about them, not provoke them." Krelth hesitated. "But the data..." Zorath cut him off. "The data can wait. Our survival cannot." Still, as he gave the order, Zorath felt the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had always prided himself on being calm and methodical, but this was different. There was something deeply unsettling about the human presence in the galaxy, and if they couldn't understand it, if they couldn't predict it, then the consequences could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Elaine Harper stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, a sleek human warship that cut through space like a knife through water. Her crew, too, had sensed something off about the Centaur's presence. They had arrived without warning, and though they had yet to make contact, Harper knew that the stakes were about to get far higher than they had anticipated. The tension in the command room was thick. Officers at their stations shifted nervously as the Centaur ships drifted closer, silently observing from the shadows. "Captain," Lieutenant Rios said, his voice strained, "they haven't made a move yet. Should we try to make contact?" Harper's eyes narrowed as she scanned the space ahead. "No, we wait. If they want to know about us, they'll have to make the first move." Her hand instinctively hovered over the control panel, ready to initiate the ship's defenses at the slightest sign of aggression. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The Centaur were watching. And Captain Harper couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for something. The question was, what? The stillness of space seemed to stretch on indefinitely as the Centaur fleet loomed in the distance, their advanced ships cloaked in silence. For Captain Elaine Harper, the tension on the Vanguard was unbearable. The Centaur hadn't made a single aggressive move, but that only deepened her suspicions. Why were they waiting? What were they hoping to learn about humanity? Her fingers hovered just above the controls, prepared to initiate evasive maneuvers or call for reinforcements at a moment's notice. "Captain," Lieutenant Rios said, breaking the silence, his voice tight with anxiety. "The Sinta have not engaged. They're just watching. It's like they're studying us, waiting for something." Harper's gaze remained fixed on the flickering stars ahead. "I know, Rios, but why are they still watching us? It doesn't make sense. They have the chance to scan us already. Why not take it? Maybe they're scared?" Rios ventured, though his voice lacked conviction. "We've been facing them for weeks, and every time they get close, they pull back." The idea of fear from the Sinta, beings who were nearly godlike in their technological prowess, seemed almost absurd. But there was no denying the strange pattern of behavior. They hadn't just retreated, they'd been waiting, calculating, observing. Harper's mind raced. The human fleet, although impressive in its own right, had only just begun to reach the outer edges of space exploration. They were far from invincible, and yet the Sinta, who could wipe them out with a mere thought, seemed hesitant. What was it that made them hesitate? The truth, she realized, was far darker than she imagined. On Earth, Dr. Lucas Wren, the lead scientist behind the human warship program, was alone in his lab, running final checks on the ship's engines. The hum of the equipment around him filled the quiet space, but his mind wasn't on the engines. It was on something far more pressing: the strange energy pulse embedded in every human warship. Months ago, he'd stumbled across a discovery, an ancient and nearly forgotten form of weaponry. It wasn't something humanity had developed on its own, but rather something they had inherited. There were whispers of an experiment conducted long ago by a mysterious group, one that had vanished without a trace. But the weapons they left behind, sophisticated, unpredictable, and lethal, had been silently embedded into every ship design, every warship ever built since. Dr. Wren had spent months perfecting the integration of these ancient weapons into human warships, using his own advanced methods to harness and control the energy they released. But there was one key element he hadn't fully understood. The weapon was powered by human emotion: fear, determination, rage. These emotions were tied directly to the output of the energy pulse. It was why humanity's ships, despite their primitive appearance, had such a devastating capacity for destruction. And now, as Dr. Wren sat in his lab, a deep sense of dread crept over him. The Sinta had been near, too near. They had scanned human ships before, but the reaction had always been catastrophic. The human warships were unpredictable, and that unpredictability was a weapon in itself. He reached for a secure communicator, his hands trembling. There was no time to explain it all, but he had to warn them. He had to warn Captain Harper. "Captain," he said, his voice urgent as he transmitted the message. "Whatever you do, do not let the Sinta scan your ship. Their technology is far more advanced than ours, but if they try to probe our ships with their sensors, if they try to understand them, it will trigger a reaction, one that will destroy them." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. On the Vanguard, Harper's eyes went wide as the message blinked across the console. The weight of Dr. Wren's words hit her like a hammer. Destroy them? The realization was sickening. The Sinta didn't know what they were dealing with. They had no idea what humanity's ships were capable of, and now they were dangerously close to finding out. "Rios, get me the fleet commanders," Harper said, her voice sharp. "We need to prepare for the worst. The Sinta, they don't understand what they're dealing with." As the comms buzzed to life, Harper couldn't shake the eerie feeling settling in her chest. The Sinta had already made a critical mistake, one they didn't even know they'd made, and the countdown to catastrophe was already underway. The Sinta fleet hung motionless in the vastness of space, the cold stars surrounding them like distant, uncaring witnesses to a silent tension that seemed to stretch for eternity. Inside the flagship Lorithax, the bridge was shrouded in near-perfect stillness, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's systems. The Sinta officers, their alien forms unblinking and stoic, manned their stations with practiced precision, but even they couldn't ignore the unease that had settled into the air. Soreth, the fleet's commander, paced slowly across the command center, his mind once as sharp as a blade, was now clouded with doubt and curiosity. The human ships below had been moving in tight formations, their actions coordinated and deliberate. Yet there was an element of randomness to their behavior, a chaos that defied the logical patterns of the Sinta's own kind. It was something unexpected, unpredictable. Sir Krelf, his second-in-command, spoke, his voice hesitant. The humans are still keeping their distance. They're not responding to our communications. Could they possibly know something about us? Could they sense we're watching them? Zorath didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood motionless, gazing at the human fleet. He had spent decades studying countless species, and yet humanity baffled him more than any other. In all his experience, he had never encountered a species so irrational. The humans' technological advancements were rudimentary at best, their ships crude and illogical in design, and yet they had survived. More than that, against the odds, they had thrived. Why? I've reviewed their data, Zorath muttered, his mind racing. They shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be able to pose any threat to us. And yet, you want to scan them, don't you? Krelf interrupted, a knowing glint in his eyes. Zorath froze. It was true. He did want to scan them. His intellect, always craving understanding, wanted to unlock the mystery of these humans. What made them so dangerous? What was it about their ships, their technology, their will that defied every expectation? The temptation to know was overwhelming. But there was the warning, a warning they had all heard in hushed tones back at the Sinta Council. The humans' ships, while appearing unremarkable, carried an anomaly, an energy that triggered disastrous results when exposed to advanced technology. Zorath had witnessed the explosion that had destroyed the scout ship only days before, but it was the uncertainty of the danger that gnawed at him. He had to know, but the risk was almost too great. He clenched his fists. We cannot let fear dictate our actions, Krelf, Zorath finally said, his voice low but resolute. We will proceed, but carefully. Prepare a smaller ship, no heavy scans, just a low-level probe. We will not provoke them, but we will see what we are dealing with. Krelf hesitated. If you're wrong. Zorath cut him off with a glare. If I'm wrong, we use nothing but a scout ship. If we do nothing, we risk everything. Do you understand, Krelf? Krelf nodded, though his face betrayed his uncertainty. The stakes were high, and the Sinta, once an undisputed force in the galaxy, were teetering on the edge of a new frontier, a frontier that, to their horror, they could not fully comprehend. Meanwhile, on the Vanguard, Captain Harper had just finished reading Dr. Wren's urgent warning. Her eyes were wide, her heart racing. The pieces were falling into place now. They didn't understand humanity's warships, and if they tried to scan them, if they tried to probe them in any way, there would be consequences. Terrible, violent consequences. She turned to Rios, her face grim. We can't afford to let them get close. The Sinta are curious, and curiosity will be their undoing. Rios hesitated, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. Captain, if they make a move, we'll be ready. But what if they don't try to engage? Harper's expression hardened. Then we make them engage. We force their hand. And so, with the heavy burden of her decision weighing on her, Harper gave the order to the fleet. It wasn't a declaration of war, not yet. But it was the first step toward an inevitable confrontation. She could feel it in her bones. The Sinta would push. They would test the limits of humanity's defenses, as they had done with every species before them. And when they did, it would be too late to turn back. The Sinta had made one critical error. They underestimated the chaos of humanity, and soon they would learn just how costly that mistake could be. The Sinta scout ship was sleek, a marvel of alien engineering, designed for silent observation. Its advanced cloaking technology rendered it nearly invisible to the human fleet below, and its sensors were calibrated to detect even the faintest energy signatures. Zorath stood at the command console of the Lorithax, his eyes locked on the screen displaying the scout ship's data as it moved into position, a few hundred kilometers from the Vanguard. Proceed with caution, Zorath murmured under his breath. His voice was calm, but his mind raced. If his theory was correct, If the human warships truly harbored some kind of energy pulse that reacted violently to external scans, then this was the moment of truth. The stakes had never been higher. The scout ship began its slow, deliberate approach, its sensors finely tuned to capture every data point, every fluctuation of energy coming from the human vessels. Zorath watched, his breath held in anticipation. The command room of Lorithax was eerily quiet, every officer silently tracking the unfolding events. The tension was palpable, a weight pressing down on everyone, squeezing the air from the room. On the Vanguard, Captain Harper sat rigidly in her chair, eyes flicking from one display to another. She had given the order to prepare for a defensive maneuver, just in case the Centaur made the wrong move. But what if they didn't? What if they didn't initiate a scan at all, and this entire standoff came to nothing? Could humanity really outsmart the Centaur, or had they overestimated their defenses? Her thoughts were interrupted by Rios. "Captain, they're moving in closer. Their scout ship is heading directly for us." Harper's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "Activate cloaking systems. Set shields to full. Prepare for evasive maneuvers on my mark." The minutes ticked by like hours. Zorath's eyes never left the screen. The human ships were now fully within range. He had no intention of firing, not yet. His mind was fixated on understanding the technology within those ships, even if it meant a calculated risk. The data he was about to extract could change the course of Centaur history. And then, without warning, the pulse fired. It was instantaneous. A sudden blinding flash of energy erupted from the heart of the Vanguard. Zorath barely had time to register the surge of power before the shockwave hit. The energy pulse detonated outward, expanding at a speed that defied logic, sending ripples of sheer force across the void of space. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart, the pulse vibrating through the Centaur scout ship's delicate systems with devastating precision. "Impossible," Zorath whispered. His eyes widened in disbelief as the scout ship disintegrated in a burst of brilliant, cascading light. A violent tremor rocked the Lorithax, a pulse of raw energy so intense that even their advanced shielding struggled to contain it. Alarms blared throughout the command center as systems flickered and overloaded. The entire fleet was suddenly plunged into chaos. "Report," Zorath demanded, his voice strained. His fingers flew across the command console, but nothing could prepare him for what he saw. The scout ship, reduced to nothing but a cloud of cosmic debris. The crew was in shock, officers scrambling to regain control of their systems. The damage reports flooded in one after another, shields failing, propulsion systems offline, communications severed. The pulse had not only destroyed their scout ship, it had sent an enormous shockwave through the entire Centaur fleet. The shock of the blast was enough to disable half of their ships, leaving them vulnerable and disoriented. Kraut's voice was hoarse, disbelief creeping into his tone. "Zorath, we've never encountered anything like this. Their ships. It's as if they," he faltered. "It's not possible. How could they harness such power?" Zorath clenched his jaw. The human warships weren't just armed with energy pulses. They were alive with them. The sheer force of that blast felt as though it had been powered by something primal. And now, the Centaur were faced with the awful realization that their most dangerous enemy wasn't their weapons, but the unpredictability of humanity itself. The transmission to the Vanguard was now open, crackling with static as Harper's voice came through cold and clear. "That's your warning, Zorath. You've seen what happens when you push too far." Zorath could barely comprehend the words. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was something far worse, a warning shot, not just to the Centaur, but to anyone who would dare challenge humanity's place in the galaxy. But there was no turning back now. The Centaur had made their move, and humanity was not about to let them forget it. As the Lorithax drifted in space, weakened, but still intact, Zorath's thoughts turned dark. The Centaur are no longer the hunters. We are the hunted. The silence in the command center of the Lorithax was deafening. Alarms still rang sporadically, their shrill cries echoing through the walls of the ship. Outside, the remaining Centaur fleet remained motionless, disoriented from the violent shockwave that had crippled their reconnaissance efforts. Zorath stood rigid at the center of the chaos, his mind struggling to process the enormity of the situation. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he fought to regain his composure. How could this happen? He had anticipated the worst, but this, the complete annihilation of their scout ship, the wave of energy that had crippled half of their fleet, was beyond anything he could have imagined. The Sinta, the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, had just been blindsided by a species they had deemed beneath them. They had underestimated humanity's unpredictability, their ability to defy logic, and now they were paying the price. Krelth approached cautiously, his voice tight with tension. "Commander, we need to reassess. If their ships have this kind of power, this unpredictable energy, they're no longer just an inconvenience. They could wipe us out." Zorath turned sharply, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "We're not dead yet, and we're certainly not backing down. We'll make the humans understand that we're not to be trifled with." He activated a secure channel, his voice steady but laced with a cold fury. "Activate all remaining vessels. Full scan protocols. We will analyze their ships, carefully, and find the key to controlling this chaos. We will break them." As Zorath's orders filtered through the fleet, a dark determination gripped him. There was no turning back now. The Sinta had learned the hard way that humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with, one that could strike with a power that defied understanding. On the Vanguard, Captain Harper's face remained calm, though her thoughts were anything but. The data flooding in from the fleet confirmed it. The Sinta were regrouping. They hadn't given up. The pressure was mounting, but she refused to give in. "Captain," Rios's voice broke through the static on the bridge. "They're preparing to engage again. We've disabled their scout ship, but they're not backing down." Harper's jaw tightened as she stood and paced before the view screen. The Sinta had made a critical error in underestimating humanity, but they were not going to make the same mistake twice. Harper knew they wouldn't quit until they had answers, and until they had either broken humanity or forced them to submit. "Prepare for incoming fire," she commanded, her voice steady. "But we're not going to wait for them to make the first move again. Initiate a counteroffensive. It's time to show them that we won't be intimidated." She watched as her officers scrambled to make the necessary adjustments, preparing weapons, adjusting shields, and tightening the ship's defenses. Harper felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The lives of her crew, the fate of her people, were all in her hands. A low hum filled the bridge as the ship's weapons powered up. "All units, get ready," Harper said. "We won't give them the chance to make their next move. We make our stand now." Zorath watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as the human fleet moved into position. He could see the lights of their ships flicker like tiny fireflies in the vastness of space. But there was something different now. The humans were not retreating. They were gathering their strength, preparing for the inevitable clash. The Sinta fleet, still disoriented from the initial shockwave, was far from their prime. Their shields were weakened, their engines taxed, but they still had the advantage in numbers, and their weapons were deadly. Zorath took a deep breath, calculating his next move. "We have to strike first. If we allow them to control the engagement, they'll use their chaotic power against us again. We need to neutralize their ability to retaliate." As he gave the order to engage, a ripple of unease passed through his command staff. Every officer could feel it. This was not just a war for dominance. It was a battle for survival. The battle was about to begin, and in the silence before the storm, both sides knew one thing. There was no going back. The galaxy was now a battlefield, with humanity's warships and the Sinta's fleet locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But what none of them knew was that this was just the beginning. As the first volley of fire erupted from both sides, the shockwaves rippled across the stars. The clash between the Sinta and humanity was no longer just a military confrontation. It was a statement, a war for dominance over the stars, one that would leave a scar on the galaxy itself. And neither side knew who would emerge from the ashes. The void of space was torn apart by the thunderous roar of weapons fire. The Vanguard fired first, its weapons crackling with power, sending brilliant beams of energy streaking through the darkness. The Centaur fleet responded immediately, unleashing a devastating volley of fire in return, their advanced plasma cannons lighting up the night like deadly comets. Ships shuddered under the force of the blasts, shields flaring in desperate attempts to protect their hulls. Captain Harper's eyes were locked on the display as her crew scrambled to maintain control. Every second felt like an eternity. The human fleet, though smaller and less advanced, was fighting with a ferocity that the Centaur hadn't anticipated. They were making every shot count, every maneuver sharp and precise. It wasn't just their weapons, it was their unrelenting determination, their instinctive drive to survive that made them such dangerous adversaries. "Captain," Rios called, his voice tight with urgency. "The Centaur fleet is moving into formation. They're preparing for a full-scale assault." Harper didn't blink. "Give them everything we've got. Fire at will. We're not going to let them take another inch of ground." The first shots from the Centaur came too fast, too brutal, but Harper had already predicted their move. With a sharp command, she ordered the vanguard to break right, diving toward the asteroid field that loomed ominously on the edge of the battlefield. The Centaur, overconfident in their firepower, followed suit, but too aggressively. They didn't anticipate the density of the asteroids, the sharp turns, the way the human ships could weave through the debris with unsettling ease. The first Centaur ship collided with an asteroid. A violent explosion ripped through the craft, debris scattering in all directions. Another followed, then another. The Centaur fleet, notorious for its precision and dominance, was now grappling with the unpredictable chaos of the battlefield, the very same chaos that humans thrived in. But even as victory felt within their grasp, Harper felt the unease creep back into her bones. She glanced at the screen, noticing a new signal emerging from the heart of the Centaur fleet. Something was changing. Something was building. "Rios, what's that?" Harper demanded, her eyes narrowing as the unknown energy signature flared. Rios furiously typed into his console. It's coming from their command ship. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Wait." The signal surged, stronger and stronger, until the entire human fleet was bathed in a pulse of energy so powerful it was almost tangible, crackling through the airwaves and knocking out communication lines across every vessel. What the hell was that? Rios's voice wavered. Harper's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a weapon designed to disrupt. She watched in horror as the pulse sent shockwaves through the human fleet. Shields flickered. Power grids shorted out. Vessels veered off course as the energy ricocheted, scrambling their systems. The Centaur command ship had activated some kind of dissonant field, an electromagnetic wave meant to incapacitate the very systems that had kept humanity's warships intact. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the aftermath of the pulse, there was something else. A shift, a crackling, sickeningly familiar feeling spread throughout the fleet, emanating from the very core of the human ships. It wasn't just the pulse that had disrupted their systems. It was human emotion. As the Centaur fleet hovered on the brink of total annihilation, something deep within the heart of humanity's warships surged in response. Something primal, something instinctual. The energy pulse triggered it. It wasn't just the ship's weapons that had awakened. It was humanity itself. Harper watched, her mouth going dry, as the energy began to build. "No, it's not possible," she whispered to herself. And then, from the depths of the human fleet, a pulse of pure, raw emotion erupted, a burst of energy that tore through space, lighting the battlefield like a supernova. The human fleet systems had never been more unstable, more dangerous. The same chaos that had powered them forward now turned into a force of nature, amplifying their unpredictability, turning the tide of battle in ways the Centaur could not control. On the Centaur command ship, Zorat's eyes widened in shock. The field they had created, designed to neutralize the humans, had triggered something else. The energy was growing exponentially, shifting into a force that no technological advantage could counter. "What is this?" Krelf demanded, his voice strained with disbelief. "Their ships. They're becoming alive." Zorat's mind raced, horror creeping through him like a creeping cold. He realized with dawning terror that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their firepower, or their unpredictability. It was something far deeper, something buried beneath the surface of their warships, something the Cinta could never have predicted: humanity's will to fight. And now, it was unstoppable. The void of space trembled as the burst of pure energy from the vanguard washed over the battlefield, rippling outward with the intensity of a supernova. The Cinta fleet recoiled, their ships faltering in midair, scrambling to regain their bearings as systems sparked and flickered. Zorath gripped the edge of the command console on the Lorithax, his knuckles white. The sheer force of the human response was beyond his comprehension, tearing through the Cinta's carefully laid plans. He had never felt such raw, unrestrained power from a species so chaotic. "Report," Zorath barked, his voice tight with a mix of disbelief and mounting fury. Krelth, his voice trembling slightly, responded, "We've lost 2 more ships. Shields are fluctuating. Weapon systems." "Shut it down," Zorath ordered, his tone dark. "We cannot afford any more mistakes. Divert all power to the shields." The humans, their ships are more than just ships. They've become something else, something unpredictable. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Harper's eyes were locked onto the screen as her ship groaned under the strain of the energy pulse. Systems were struggling, but they were holding. For now, she knew it was only a matter of time before the Cinta recalibrated, adapted, and counterattacked with even more deadly precision. They had to finish this now. "Captain, the Cinta are regrouping," Rios called out. "They're preparing for another offensive." Harper's eyes narrowed as she took in the display. The Cinta were reorganizing, their ships forming tighter formations, adjusting to the human unpredictability with alarming speed. But they still hadn't fully adapted. Not yet. "Do we have enough power left for a full barrage?" she asked, her voice calm, but filled with an edge of urgency. "We can barely keep the shields up, Captain, but we can make it work," Rios replied, his voice tinged with hesitation. Harper's lips curled into a tight smile. "Do it." The order was passed, and the Vanguard's weapons came online. Every gun, every missile, every energy beam was powered up, ready to unleash the full fury of humanity's will. The Cinta had miscalculated the depth of human ingenuity, but they hadn't yet felt the full weight of it. Now they would. As the Vanguard loomed closer to the heart of the Cinta fleet, Harper's hand hovered over the command panel. "On my mark," she said, her voice a whisper of steel. "Fire." In that instant, every human ship responded with a synchronized barrage, a dazzling display of energy and firepower that sent shockwaves through space. Beams of concentrated plasma and ion bursts streaked through the void, smashing into Cinta ships with brutal force. Explosions rippled through the Cinta fleet, each blast echoing in the cold emptiness of space. But then, the impossible happened. The Cinta ships, battered and breaking apart under the assault, began to shift. Their hulls warped, bending and folding in ways that no human ship could ever hope to replicate. Zorath, watching in a mix of awe and horror, understood immediately. The Cinta weren't just fighting, they were adapting, learning, evolving in real time. "They're morphing?" Krelth whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Zorath's mind raced. The Cinta had always prided themselves on their adaptability, but never had they encountered a foe so unpredictable. The human pulse, the erratic energy coursing through their ships, had triggered something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. "Pull back, all ships, retreat," Zorath ordered, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. But it was too late. The Cinta fleet, once poised for victory, was now being torn apart by the unstoppable force that humanity had unleashed. Ships were evaporating into stardust, their advanced shielding systems no match for the raw power surging from the human vessels. The pulse of chaotic energy was now a storm, a living, breathing force of nature that could not be contained. In the midst of the destruction, Zorath's mind flashed to one final desperate possibility. He had one last weapon, one that had been kept secret from the Cinta's highest ranks. The Lorithax itself, with all its untested might, could engage in one final cataclysmic attack that might tip the scales. But it was a risk, a gamble. If they failed, They would be wiped out. He turned to Krelf, his voice low and determined. Activate the pulse core. Now. Krelf hesitated, his face a mask of uncertainty. Commander, the risk. Do it? Zorath snapped. The pulse core was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of disrupting not just the human ships, but the very fabric of space itself. It was a last resort, one that would either annihilate humanity's fleet or wipe out the Sintar's own in a final devastating explosion. As the countdown began, the Sintar knew this was their final chance to regain control. Their fate hung on the precipice, the fate of the entire galaxy resting on a single moment of destruction. Zorath's hand hovered over the activation switch, and in that instant, he realized something terrible. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to prevent humanity from becoming the new force that would rule the stars. And now, as the pulse core hummed to life, he had no idea if the universe itself would survive this final collision of chaos and order. The countdown on the Lorithax's command console ticked down, each second a drumbeat in the growing chaos. Zorath's eyes were fixed on the glowing red lights of the pulse core, a weapon so powerful it could tear apart entire fleets, create rifts in space, and unravel the very fabric of reality. It was their last card, the only hope the Sintar had to turn the tide of the war. But as he hovered over the activation switch, a gnawing sense of doubt clawed at him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about control, and humanity had proven one thing. They wouldn't bend. They had become something more than a foe. They had become a force of nature. Commander, it's ready. Krelf's voice broke through Zorath's spiraling thoughts, his tone laced with nervous anticipation. Zorath didn't respond immediately. He could hear the distant rumble of destruction from the human fleet, the telltale flash of energy bursts tearing through space, signaling the death of another Sintar ship. The Sintar were crumbling. Yet, Zorath knew they couldn't retreat now. The pulse core had to be deployed. Failure would mean their annihilation. And yet, there was something else now. Something Zorath hadn't accounted for. Something human. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the energy pulses emanating from the Vanguard and the rest of the human fleet. A twisting, chaotic maelstrom of raw emotion and pure willpower. It wasn't just their weapons that struck. It was something deeper, a fundamental force that went beyond technology. It was the heart of humanity, untamable, unpredictable, relentless. Zorath's fist clenched. Activate the core, he ordered, his voice low and filled with finality. Krelf hesitated, his hand just inches from the activation key. Are you sure this is the only way? The humans, they don't stop. They've adapted to everything we've thrown at them. What if? Zorath whirled on him, his face twisted with frustration. We have no other choice. If we don't wipe them out now, we die. As the final words left his mouth, an explosive wave of energy radiated outward from the Vanguard. Zorath's mind registered it instantly. Something new. Something that shouldn't be possible. The pulse of energy from the human ships wasn't just erratic anymore. It had become focused, purposeful, like a living, breathing entity. The Sintar were facing a new kind of war, one not driven by technology, but by sheer, unrelenting force of will. Zorath's finger hovered over the switch once more, but it was too late. The humans had already anticipated their move. Captain Harper. Rios's voice broke the silence, tinged with both awe and fear. The pulse core, it's destabilizing. We're reading massive energy fluctuations. Harper's eyes widened, scanning the screens. She could see it now. The Lorithax was attempting to trigger its final weapon, but something had gone wrong. The chaotic pulse from the human fleet was forcing the Sintar's systems into overload. Their own weapon was threatening to consume them. Brace for impact. Harper barked, just as a catastrophic surge of energy detonated from the Sintar flagship. The pulse rippled outward, spiraling through space, its force like a black hole of destruction. For a brief moment, it seemed as if time itself froze. The Vanguard and the remaining human ships were caught in the storm of pure energy. But they did not flinch. No shields flared, no alarms blared. Instead, there was only a deep, all-consuming silence. Then, with a shockwave that reverberated across the galaxy, the pulse core detonated, not as a weapon of mass destruction, but as an implosion. The very fabric of space began to warp as the energy destabilized, consuming the Cinta ships, their hulls twisting and contorting under the catastrophic force. They were being undone, their once unstoppable fleet ripped apart from within. And yet, as the chaos unfolded, the human fleet stood untouched. Harper's hands gripped the command chair, her mind racing. The Cinta had triggered the collapse, but the humans had emerged alive, not just physically, but in spirit. The wreckage of the Cinta fleet began to scatter, drifting helplessly like broken fragments of a once proud empire. The human fleet moved in close, assessing the damage. The victory was decisive, but it was more than that. Humanity had proven something far deeper, something the Cinta had never understood. They were a force that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be predicted, and could never be wiped out. In the shattered remains of the battlefield, Captain Harper allowed herself a small, hard smile. This was no longer just a war for survival, it was a statement. The universe was about to realize that humanity had become the new force of the stars, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. "Signal the fleet," Harper said softly, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "Tell them we're just getting started."